The admittedly sketchy evidence to date suggests that our electropollution is presenting us, and perhaps all animals, with a double challenge: weaker immune systems and stronger diseases. We shouldn't be surprised then at our onslaught of new ailments beginning about 1950 and accelerating toward the future. In several cases, new maladies have recently been described as coming from pathogens that previously weren't capable of inducing disease. And this too shouldn't be a surprise to us. Among the newcomers are Ray's syndrome. First described in 1963, this condition begins with severe vomiting as a child is recovering from the flu or chickenpox. It then progresses to lethargy, personality changes, convulsions, coma, and death. The mortality rate, initially very high, now has been reduced to about 10%, but the incidence has increased greatly. Lyme disease, a virus disease carried by certain insects. It produces severe arthritis in humans. It's one of several similar disease illnesses that have appeared only recently. Legionnaire's disease. This is a pneumonia caused by a common soil bacterium that has found a second home in air conditioning systems. The organism caused us no recognized problems before the initial outbreak in Philadelphia in 1976. AIDS. Autoimmune deficiency syndrome is a condition in which the body's immune system fails completely and its owner often dies. The patient is unable to resist common, otherwise harmless bacteria and viruses and can no longer suppress the seeds of cancer that reside in all of us. At present, some sort of virus is suspected as the precipitating cause. Herpes genitalis. This disease isn't new, but its prevalence and severity have increased tremendously in one decade. Sexual permissiveness generally takes the blame, but a decline in immunocompetence may be more important. Certainly, there are additional factors that may be contributing to the rise of these and other new illnesses. Chemical pollution and the prevalence of junk food are two of the most obvious. However, these diseases, as well as cancer, birth defects, and other growth problems described below, are on the increase throughout the industrialized world. So are some of the major psychological diseases, such as depression and compulsive use of all types of drugs, from caffeine, nicotine, and alcohol to prescription tranquilizers and the illegal euphorics. Although heart attack death rates have declined in the last 5 years for no known reason, they're still far higher than before World War II. These diseases exist more or less than the same rates in countries whose chemical toxicity, eating habits, and styles of life are widely divergent. However, the massive use of electromagnetic energy is a common denominator uniting all of the developed nations. In particular, the entire North American continent, Western Europe, and Japan generate such strong 50 and 60 hertz fields that they can be sensed by satellites in space. The population of these areas are continually bombarded by these ELF fields. Disruption of the biocycle timing cues must inevitably make it harder for the body to regulate the mitotic rate of its cells. The major exception to the no effect assurances in the Nos Sanguine Seafarer report was unignorable evidence that 75 hertz fields lengthened the mitotic cycle and hindered cell respiration of the slime mold used in standardized tests of cellular growth. The same effects were seen regardless of field strength. Hence, we should expect that ELF pollution would foster disease in which growth processes go awry. Indeed, there has been an alarming increase in such problems. Cancer is hardly a novel illness, but its prevalence is new. In the mid-1960s, roughly a quarter of the US population could expect to develop it. By the mid-1970s, that figure had risen to 1/3, and it's now even higher. The incidence of birth defects has doubled in the past quarter century. There has been a similarly rapid rise in infertility and other reproductive problems. Where defects of cell divisions may be on the rise increase as well, especially among workers exposed by occupation to high levels of electromagnetic energy. Pathologist Tyler Friedman of the Army Medical Center in El Paso reported in 1981 that radar technicians were 3 to 12 times more likely than the rest of the population to get polycythemia, a rare blood disorder characterized by production of too many red blood cells. Such relationships are hard to confirm statistically, however, in diseases affecting small numbers of people. We need direct experimental evidence and large-scale studies on the widespread disorders. Both are now available. Back in 1971, two more Soviet researchers, S.G. Mamontov and L.N. Ivanova, reported that industrial strength 50 Hz electric fields tripled the mitotic rate of liver and cornea cells in mice. Soon afterward, Bassett and Pilla published empirical evidence that pulse EMF accelerated in the healing of bone fractures. For the most part, however, concrete evidence that time-varying fields could affect cell division was slow in coming. That situation has changed in the last few years. Several experimenters, notably Stephen Smith, have now proven that the electrobiology bone healing device using 15 pulse bursts per second speed up the division rate of cells that are already proliferating rapidly. Among normal cells, this includes skin, gut, and liver cells. In 1983, A.R. Leiboff, a biophysicist at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan, reported on the effects of more inclusive set of parameters. Magnetic fields of 0.2 to 4 Gauss vibrating at 10 to 4,000 Hertz all enhanced the replication of DNA during the synthesis phase of mitosis. As predicted, the interaction appears to be greatest between 35 and 100 Hertz. Jose M.R. Delgado, the flamboyant advocate of a psychocivilized society through mind control, who has publicized direct electrical stimulation of the brain by such displays as stopping a charging bull in its track with a radio impulse transmitted to an implanted electrode. Recently reported results of a genetic study of magnetic fields at 3 frequencies. Delgado placed chick embryos in minuscule magnetic fields pulsed at 10, 100, and 1000 Hertz. He used fields of only 0.001 Gauss, or roughly the strength of the Earth field's micropulsations. Chicks exposed to the 100 Hertz fields were normal, but those dosed at 100 Hertz developed severe defects of the central nervous system. The highest frequency also yielded abnormalities, but they were much less severe. Higher intensities are common in homes and offices and near power lines. The Navy has found stronger fields near its 76H3 ELF antenna and re-radiated at that frequency from a power line a mile away. It's important to bear in mind that in stimulating DNA synthesis, an electromagnetic field doesn't distinguish between desirable and undesirable growth. It affects all cells in the same way, but cell systems that are already rapidly dividing are speeded up at the most. As we've seen in earlier chapters, these susceptible processes include healing and embryonic growth and cancer. In fact, a researcher working on the New York State Department of Health's Powerland project, Wendell Winters of University of Texas Health Scientists Center in San Antonio, recently reported some of the first laboratory evidence that power frequencies can accelerate malignant growth. Winters exposed human cancer cells to 60 hertz electromagnetic fields for just 24 hours and found a six-fold increase in their growth rate 7 to 10 days later. Only the magnetic component appears to accelerate healing in any way. Power frequency electric fields severely retard fracture healing in rats, as Andy Marino, Jim Cullen, Maria Reichmanis, and I proved with a series of experiments in 1979. This work was confirmed the following year by R.D. Phillips in a study done for a Department of Energy review of transmission line bioeffects. Moreover, the perturbation of normal cell cycle time is enhanced if nuclear magnetic resonance, NMR, is induced in the atoms of the DNA molecules. In simplified terms, nuclear magnetic resonance is present when magnetic fields around atomic nuclei are induced to vibrate in unison. The phenomenon requires two external magnetic fields, one steady and one pulsating. For every chemical element, the oscillating field at a specific frequency will induce resonance within the steady state field at a certain strength. In 1983, a research team under A.H. Jeffrey Assel showed that the Earth's magnetic background could serve as the steady field, while the harmonics of powerland frequencies could produce a time-varying field that would induce nuclear magnetic resonance in at least two common atoms of living tissues, potassium and chlorine. Other elements might also be susceptible to the effect. Bacteria and yeast cells exposed to these NMR conditions doubled their rate of DNA synthesis and proliferation, but daughter cells were half size. Leiboff analyzed contradictory studies, found that the contradictions disappeared when he calculated resonance conditions for the Earth's field where each test was done. Previous work must now be reinterpreted as one vast experiment and adding new frequencies to the varying background. Almost all experimenters to date have tested the response of organisms to a single specific frequency and intensity. This approach was needed in the beginning to provide a basic level of knowledge, but it's far removed from everyday life, in which we're all exposed to many frequencies simultaneously. A synergism between electromagnetic energy and radioactivity has already been suggested by the fact that cancer rates among nuclear power plant workers are higher than was predicted solely by the higher levels of ionizing radiation in their environment. Nuclear power plants abound in multi-frequency radio waves and other electromagnetic radiation. In addition to inducing NMR in the building blocks of living cells, multiple frequencies may likewise interact synergistically to yield biohazards greater than the sum of their individual dangers. Animal experiments on the risk of cancer and birth defects from electromagnetic energy are scarce, even in the USSR. The little work that has been done was mostly on microwaves. The only well-known American laboratory study of birth defects dangers used pulsed radio waves and found numerous mutations in fruit fly offspring. In 1976, a Russian group dosed rats with 50 and 500 microwatts for 1 to 10 days. When they then studied somatic non-genital cells from the animals, they found chromosome defects in astounding numbers. At the higher power density, there were 5 times as many as in the controls. And even at lower intensity, the numbers continued to increase to 150% of the normal value for 2 weeks after the beams were turned off. A 1979 study directed by Przemysław Zerski of the National Research Institute of Mother and Child in Warsaw documented increased numbers of damaged chromosomes in the sperm of mice exposed 1 hour a day for 2 weeks to microwave intensities ranging from 100 microwatts up to the American safety standard of 10,000 microwatts. An even more discomforting set of data came from a mid-1970s Russian experiment in which female mice were subjected to small power densities, 10 to 50 microwatts. Throughout this range, there was a decrease in the number of size of litters and an increase in developmental problems among the newborn animals. The rate of stillbirths jumps from 1.1% at the lowest intensity to 7% at the highest. Alas, human beings are the main experimental animals in this line of research. Those who contend microwaves pose no danger often quote a survey of 20,000 Korean War veterans completed in 1980 by C.D. Robinette and others for the NOS, National Research Council's Medical Follow-up Agency. Comparing VA medical records of radar technicians and others heavily exposed to microwaves with the records of controls. This group found no increase in the death rate. This finding can't be relied on, however. Most of the controls were radar operators who are exposed to some radiation from radar beams as well as from their consoles. Thus, the presumption that they absorb negligible amounts of EMR doesn't hold water. In the last few years, more reliable epidemiological studies have appeared, showing increased rates of cancer and birth defects among people exposed to higher than average levels of electromagnetic energy. Since microwave broadcasts from television and telephone relays must be in a line of sight to the receivers, there are only a few suitable high locations for transmitters near each city. Of necessity, there's an above normal concentration of L fields and microwave spill-off in that area, possibly leading to a destructive synergism as outlined above. Moreover, since TV is aimed at an audience and phone relay beams at the next station, corridors are set up within people get more than their share of microwaves. Sentinel Heights, 7 miles from downtown Syracuse, is one such transmitter hill. Silently, more than 1,000 people live there. From 1974 to 1977, I learned of 7 cases of cancer in that area. They were divided into 2 clusters and 2 microwave corridors separated by a shadow zone. This is a 55% more than the 4.5 cases statistically expected for this population. And there may have been more cases I didn't know about. Obviously, in such a small and unscientific sample, the results could have been due to chance, but the ominous implications demanded some more extensive surveys. The first one came in 1979 when Nancy Wertheimer and Ed Leeper of University of Colorado Medical Center in Denver published a study of childhood cancer and power lines. The researchers studied 344 deaths from childhood cancer between 1950 and 1973. The address of each victim was paired with the address of the next baby born in the area to provide a matched series of controls. If the family had moved before the death, both birth and death addresses were used in the experimental group. The wiring of each house and its distance from the nearest transformers were studied. It proved possible to divide the houses into 2 groups, those with high current wiring configurations producing strong magnetic fields, and those wired in low current arrangement producing much weaker magnetic fields. After certain other variables such as economic class, family risk patterns, traffic, and urbanization differences were factored, the childhood death rate from leukemia, lymph node cancer, and nervous system tumors in the high current homes was more than double the rate in low current homes. 3 years later, S. Milham, Director of Occupational Health and Safety for the state of Washington, found that adults who worked in strong electromagnetic fields also had a leukemia incidence significantly higher than the norm. The link appeared in statistics for generating station operators, high voltage line maintenance workers, aluminum smelters, and several other categories of laborers. Besides the investigation itself, another thing was noteworthy about Milham's paper. The reaction of the scientific establishment. The paper quickly appeared in the same periodical, the New England Journal of Medicine, citing many other studies to prove Milham wrong. However, all of them involved controlled exposure to microwaves alone, while the other jobs studied by Milham were in the real world, where microwaves and power frequency fields mix. The editors declined to publish my letter pointing out this flaw in the critique, but still it was monumentous that such a prestigious publication ran Milham's paper at all. Soon, confirmatory reports appeared. Wertheimer's and Leeper's findings were duplicated in Stockholm by a group who correlated childhood leukemia with actual measurements of the magnetic fields. The strongest statistical link was found with 200 kilowatt power lines running within 200 yards of stricken child's home. Milham's work was vindicated. A survey in Los Angeles and Great Britain, Wertheimer herself extended her observations to adults and found the same highly significant connection between high current wiring and various cancers, especially leukemia. Radar beams composed of pulsed microwaves have the highest power densities of any EMR source. In the laboratory, both radio frequency and microwave radiation have been shown to change the gateway barrier function of cell membranes, upset hormone balances, and induced chromosome defects, all of which are factors in malignant growth. However, there have been few attempts to directly assess radar's potential role in human cancer. John R. Lester and Dennis F. Moore of the University of Kansas School of Medicine in Wichita have recently done so. Wichita was an ideal location for such an inquiry. It had 2 airports with radar towers, a few other major sources of electropollution. Its chemical environment was also quite clean as cities go. Lester and Moore plotted the cancer incidence for the whole city and found it was highest where the residents were exposed to both radar beams. It was lower where only one beam penetrated, but lowest where the population was fully shielded behind hills. The results held up where other factors such as age, poverty, sex, and race were statistically balanced as far as possible. The authors noted one apartment house whose cancer death rate was twice that of the area's nursing homes. Its upper floors were in direct line with both radar beams. Heart attack rates in North Korea and Kuopio, Finland, became the highest and most swiftly increasing in the world within a few years after the Soviets installed a gigantic over-the-horizon radar complex that bounced microwaves off the surface of Lake Ladoga and through these parts of southeastern Finland. These are rural districts whose way of life is built in outdoor labor rather than the sedentary indoor stresses generally associating with heart disease, noting that cancer rates had also risen precipitously in the region. Lester and Moore went on to investigate statistics for American counties having Air Force bases. These counties had significantly higher percentage of cancer deaths than other countries. Even though radar towers from commercial airports inevitably must have smoothed out the data and made the difference less striking. The study of human genetic defects from electromagnetic energy is still in primitive stage. In the case of microwaves, this situation is largely due to obstruction by military and government agencies. Even in World War II, rumors of radar-induced sterility were also so rampant that sailors often gave themselves treatments before shore leave. The first scientific evidence of reproductive effects didn't come until 1959, when John H. Hiller and his coworkers at the New England Institute for Medical Research in Ridgefield, Connecticut, found major chromosome abnormalities in garlic shoots irradiated with low levels of microwaves. They soon found the same changes in mammalian cells as well as fruit fly mutations mentioned above. Their work in this direction ended 1970 due to lack of funds. In 1964, a group of researchers studying Down syndrome at Johns Hopkins School of Medicine, after linking the malady to excess X-rays given to pregnant women, found an unexpected further correlation with fathers working near radar. It was a full decade before any money was allocated to follow up this finding. And while the link between parental radar exposure and Down syndrome wasn't substantiated, higher than normal numbers of chromosome defects were found in blood cells of radar men. By this time, an Alabama professor of public health had found an apparent surge in birth defects among children of radar-exposed Army helicopter pilots. In 1971, Dr. Peter Peacock noted that there had been 17 children born with clubfoot within a 16-month period at the Fort Rucker, Alabama base hospital. Statistically, there should have been no more than 4. Working through 2 federal agencies and 2 private research foundations, Peacock and others tried for 5 years to follow up this disturbing news, only to be thwarted by some clever tactical moves by the Army. Refusing to work records, medical files, and radar inspection records on the grounds of privacy and national security, officials of the Army Medical Research and Development Command managed to prevent all but 2 reassessments of Peacock's original data for several years. They stalled separate research proposals sponsored by the Environmental Protection Agency and the Food and Drug Administration's Bureau of Radiological Health without ever letting on to one agency that they were dealing with the other. As the coup de grace, the Army agreed to supply the FDA group with a survey of radar transmitters in the Fort Rucker area. The officers fobbed off and on the unwitting civilians a deceitfully sketchy map showing only one major radar installation at base, whereas an official Army report made the time of the observed birth defects showed 19 such emitters. Throughout the Vietnam War, thousands of helicopter trainees had each spent months flying through the resultant microwave haze. Much of their training consisted of homing right down the beams to within a few dozen yards of the source in TH-13 Bellcopters whose plexiglass bubbles left them naked to microwaves. The Fort Rucker affair and many other instances of military government sabotage of health effects research on microwaves had been impeccably documented in New Yorker reporter Paul Broder's 1977 book, The Zapping of America. In early 1970s, for example, follow-up to a preliminary finding of excess Down syndromes among children of Seattle airline pilots was first supported by the local chapter of Airline Pilots Association, then opposed due to pressure from the national level. The stonewalling continues. Grants for serious consideration of electropollution's dangers have been cut to trickle in the United States, but some findings continue to emerge, especially from other countries. A 1976 survey of Hydro-Quebec's generating station electricians showed a drastic change in the gender ratio of children born after one of the parents began work in the high EMF environment. before boys and girls had been born in equal numbers afterward. There were 6 times as many males and females. In 1979, study of Swedish high voltage substation workers show lower birth rates and 8% incidence of genetic defects in offspring, as compared with 3% among children of control group. The finding was confirmed in 1983. Most of the exposed electrical workers were men. The damage apparently was done during sperm formation. Most recently, in May 1984, Nancy Wertheimer presented evidence of statistical correlation between use of electrical blankets, which emit powerful EMFs, and the occurrence of birth defects. Among the most serious recent data are those concerning video display terminals, VDTs. There have been alarming numbers of miscarriages, stillbirths, and birth defects among pregnant women working in newly computerized offices. In 1 year at Dallas office of Sears, Roebuck and Company, for example, only 4 of 12 pregnancies ended normally. Among 12 pregnant VDT workers at the Defense Logistics Agency in Marietta, Georgia, there were 7 miscarriages and 3 cases of congenital defects. 4 ZDT operators in the Toronto Star's classified ad department gave birth to deformed children, while 3 coworkers who didn't work with VDTs had normal babies. These anomalies must be compared with normal 15% incidence of spontaneous abortion and 3% rate of serious birth defects among the population at large. Writing in Microwave News, an independent newsletter covering non-ionizing radiation, in 1982, editors Louis Slesson and Martha Zibko reported on 8 such clusters, and workers' groups have documented several others. But still, there has been no such attempts at a large-scale statistical study to check the oft-repeated claim that these are just coincidences. 2 studies are widely quoted as disproving harmful effects from machines. In 1977, when 2 New York Times copy editors developed radiation-induced cataracts after less than a year at their new screens, the National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health, NIOSH, tested a few machines, and finding that X-ray emissions were with the 0.5 millimeter hour standard for work exposure, concluded there was no link to the health problems. Fortunately, the agency didn't adequately measure non-ionizing radiation, gave contradictory data as to the sensitivity of its own instruments, and failed to test malfunctioning monitors, which are known to emit large amounts of X-rays. Nor is there any assurance that the X-ray exposure standard is adequate, since it was formulated for much a smaller group of workers, finally nuclear technicians and uranium miners, whose health is continuously monitored in a way that of VDT operators is not. Furthermore, the NIOSH investigators noted as enormous microwave reading of 1,000 microwatts in one of the Times offices without even bothering to find out where it was coming from. Press releases claimed a mid-1983 National Academy of Sciences review would allay the fears once and for all, proving VDTs to be risk-free. However, a reading of the text showed a different picture. While the authors played down reports linking birth defects and eye problems to VDT radiation, they admittedly failed to find any researcher adequate to answer the health questions one way or the other. According to the sketchy data available, all VDTs, which of course included video games and televisions as well as computer monitors, emit varying amounts of radiation over a broad spectrum. The transformers release VLF and ELF waves, while microwaves, X-rays, and ultraviolet emanate from the screen. Poorly adjusted or malfunctioning terminals can emit enormous amounts. Two machines tested in the offices of Long Island's Newsday, for example, were producing 15,000 microwatts of radio energy. There's no information whatever on the synergisms that may operate amid this varied radiation over longer periods of time. But I suspect that the birth defects as primary due to the ELF components. Meanwhile, the only American research on the problem continues to be daily lives of our 10 million or more console operators. Despite the reassurances, at least a third to half of the workers continue to suffer headaches, nausea, neck and back pain, and vision impairments. In fact, a 1983 survey of 1,100 UPI employees conducted by Arthur Frank, then at New York's Mount Sinai School of Medicine, suggested that BDT users lose so much time due to eye problems and neck pain that the effects may become a major drain on the economy by the end of the decade.